Hello again and welcome to the Ojo Show. This episode is all about the two moves that every blackjack player should have in their back pocket ready to use when they need to. Doubling down and splitting pairs. In blackjack there are 4 actions you'll encounter during the game. Hit, stand, double and split. Now, hitting and standing are the most common options, and yes, it's super important to learn when to hit and when to stand, because in a game with a house edge of between 0.5% and 1%, hitting and standing have a huge impact on house edge. Check out my podcast on basic blackjack strategy if you want to know how to hit and stand well. But every so often, what you're dealt, and possibly even what the dealer has, means you have the option to double down or split a pair. Doubling down and splitting pairs are power plays only you get to use. The dealer can only ever hit or stand, so doubling and splitting are in the player's favour. Both options let you increase your bet in the middle of the hand, and you can use them either aggressively or defensively. What I mean by that is that sometimes you'll take a decision in order to reduce your losses when you're way behind, and sometimes, in fact most of the time, good doubling and splitting is used to press your advantage and maximise your profit when you're ahead, i.e. when your hand has more potential than the dealer's first card. In this episode, I'm going to sell you on the power of both doubling and splitting, show you how important they are if you play blackjack regularly, and explain when to use them to best effect. Let's get started. Okay, so I'm going to start with doubling or doubling down because it's the more important of these two actions. And it's my favourite moment in any blackjack session. Anytime I place a bet, I'm basically either hoping to hit blackjack or get a chance to double down. What does that mean? Well, doubling down lets you double your initial bet once you receive your first 2 cards. To me, it's a bit like betting on your football team to win the match and then being able to double your bet once they go 1-0 up at the same odds. But it's not all good news. You only get 1 more card. You'll be hoping to make a good hand, but even when you don't, you still have a chance to win. I'll show you a classic example of that in a minute. So how does doubling down work? Well, all blackjack tables will allow you to double down once you've received your starting hand, that's your first 2 cards, but you might find slightly different rules at different tables. Some tables will only let you double down on starting hands worth 10 or 11, some if you have 9, 10 or 11, and others with any 2 cards at all. The more options you have, obviously, the better it is for you. So why is doubling down important? Well, perfect doubling down strategy is worth about 1.6% of house edge to you. Remember, if you follow perfect blackjack strategy, you'll get the house edge of around, let's call it, 1%. But if you don't use doubling to your advantage, then your house edge is going up to about 2.6%. Not good and not necessary. Okay, so when should we double? Well, there are 2 opportunities to double down. One, if you have a strong starting hand that's worth more than the dealer's first card, and if the dealer's first card is so bad that we double with almost any hand we have. Now, let's look at some examples. In a typical 8-deck European blackjack game, which is pretty much the most common one you'll get in the UK, the most common double-down situations come up when you've got 10 or 11 and the dealer has less. So, for example, if we get 11, and the dealer has an ace, we don't double because they've got 11 too. But in that situation, we would just hit. But if we have 11 and the dealer has 10 or less, then we go ahead and double. It's the same if we get 10. If the dealer has a 9 or less, we are mathematically considered to be ahead, so we can go ahead and double down. The second situation is where the optimal strategy tells us that doubling down gets us a better average return when the dealer has a weak card like a 6 or less and we have a soft hand, so that's a hand with ace something. And we know we can double down knowing that we're not going to bust. So a typical example of that would be if the dealer has a 6 and we have soft 18, that's ace 7, right down to even soft 13 or ace 2. And in this scenario, we're doubling our stake on the likelihood of the dealer busting, which they'll do about 42 to 45% of the time, rather than on the strength of our hand. So those are the 2 situations where you want to double. But what are the most common mistakes we see when doubling down? Well, most players don't actually double enough. It's very rare that I see players who double too much and are too aggressive. There are a few reasons why players are sometimes a little bit fearful of doubling down. One, well, it costs more. and they might have already bet an amount that they're happy with, and they don't really want to double that amount, especially if the dealer's got what they perceive to be a strong up card. Another reason is they've experienced hands where they've doubled down and it hasn't worked out. Here's a common example of that. Let's say we get 10 against a 9, and the right move in mathematical terms is to double. And yes, we're going to make a few more pence per £1 staked if we double compared to hit in the long run. So we double on a 10 against a 9 and we get a 2. Okay, so that's our one card. We can't improve our hand and it's now worth 12. We're stuck with it. And, you know, we probably wish that we just hit so that then at least we'd have the option to hit again. But crucially, we're not dead yet. The dealer will still bust around 1 in 4 times with their 9. So, you know, it's not the end of the world. Here's another common scenario. We get soft 15, that's ace 4, against a dealer's 4. Now, the best strategy says we should go ahead and double. Our ace 4, we get an ace, giving us soft 16. So we've got 6 or 16, neither of them very good. If only we'd hit, we could safely hit our soft 16 again without fear of busting, but we're stuck with our soft 16. But the dealer will bust their hand, the 4, about 40% of the time. So, you know, the key to these scenarios is that doubling down is all about getting more money into the hand at the moment when we are the most likely winner. We might only have, say, a 51% chance to win, and therefore it may not work out around half the time. But in blackjack, you have to press your positions of strength, however fine the margins are, because, you know, we're playing a very low variance game with a very low house edge of under 1%. And if you don't take these doubling down opportunities, however thin they are, you're making that house edge slightly bigger and you're effectively paying more money to play the game. Now, the trick to doubling well is really to choose your bet size per hand so that you never find yourself worrying about having to increase your bet just because the strategy chart tells you to do. And B is trust the maths behind the basic strategy chart. Yes, you'll see times where your double down doesn't work out. You know, you're a 60% favorite in the hand and you lose, which, you know, will happen a fair bit. But that is the luck element in blackjack that you have to understand and, you know, essentially be comfortable with and embrace. We play the theoretical edges, we trust in the best strategy, we use good bankroll management, and effectively we relish the chance to bet more when we have an edge over the dealer. That is doubling down in a nutshell. Learn to love it. Now, let's look at another way to double your bet when the right situation presents itself, splitting pairs. So, what does it mean to split pairs in blackjack? Well, when you're dealt a pair as your starting hand, you can match your initial bet, split the hand in 2 so they each become the first card of 2 new hands. The dealer will give you a second card for both hands and you play each one independently, one after the other. There are different splitting rules and every blackjack table will allow you to split a pair, but there are 3 conditions. 1, you may only get to resplit up to 3 times, or you may not get to resplit at all. Now, resplitting is where you get dealt a pair, you split them, and then one or even both of your cards becomes another pair, and you may wish to continue splitting them again and again. The second kind of sub-rule of splitting is whether you can double after you've split a pair. This is a handy little advantage if you can get it, but some tables won't allow it. So, for examples, if you get a pair of 8s, and then on one you split them, on one of those 8s you get a 3, one of your hands is now worth 11, and you may well want to go ahead and double that. The third condition about splitting is that when you split a pair of aces, that's a special scenario where you only get one more card on each ace. And if you hit a 10 on either of those aces, it only counts as 21, not blackjack. That's pretty much universal across the blackjack world. So what's the point of splitting? Well, as we've discovered with doubling down, the dealer doesn't ever get to split, whereas we get to split in certain beneficial situations. So it's a rule that's advantageous to us. It's actually only worth about 0.4% of house edge if you play it well or play it badly. So that means it's actually 4 times less important than doubling down in terms of its impact on our results over the long term. But it's fun, it's pretty easy to remember how to play it, and every little helps, right? So when do you split pairs? Now, there are 2 reasons why we split pairs, one for attack and one for defense. Let's look at defensive splitting first. Sometimes our hand is so bad that it's better to create two new hands, even if they're still worse than the dealer's up card. And second, an offensive strategy where we're in a position of strength and we can increase our stake to make a larger profit. Let's look at examples of both. So a standard example of a defensive split is a hand like 8-8, which is the best known split strategy, because basically you should always split eights whatever the dealer's hand is, even against an ace. With a pair of eights, our hand is worth 16, which is essentially the worst hand possible in blackjack to start with. When we split them, we turn 16 into two starting hands that are worth 8 each, which is, got some decent potential. Against dealer cards like 8 or above, our split is defensive because the computer simulations tell us that we're still going to make a small loss with 2 8s against a dealer 8 or above, but that's better than making a bigger loss with 16. Now let's look at the situation where the dealer has 7 or less. Then suddenly our splitting of 2 8s worth 16 into 2 hands worth 8 each is now an aggressive tactic, because we now have a chance to make 18 or more twice against a dealer's hand which is 7 or less. There are other aggressive splitting strategies. For example, if you've got 9-9 and you can split that 9-9 against any dealer card worth 9 or less. Now, everyone knows how to split aces and to split 8s, but most good blackjack players will also know when to split 9s. There are lots of opportunities to split lower pairs too when the dealer has a very weak first card. When the dealer has 6 or less, you can basically go ahead and split any pair, because we're betting on the dealer busting, not on the strength of our new hands. There are a couple of important exceptions. Firstly, we never split 10s. And the reason for that is that a pair of 10s is worth 20, which is pretty much the second strongest hand you can have in blackjack, and it's just too strong a position to give up. The maths tells us that we make more profit on average in the long run by sticking with our 20, even against a rubbish dealer card like a 6, where we might fancy trying our luck by splitting it into 2 10s. We also never split a pair of 5s, for a slightly different reason. A pair of 5s is worth 10, a great hand, which is often a good candidate for doubling down. But if you split that pair of 5s, you're turning a hand with good potential into 2 hands that are each worth 5, which is essentially statistically the worst possible starting hand. So, you would never want to do that. So essentially, always split aces, always split 8s, split a pair of 9s when the dealer has a lower card than you, and you can go ahead and split most other pairs when the dealer has 6 or less. Yes, there are a few nuances to splitting pairs, and if you want to know more, then go and find a blackjack strategy chart, check the pairs section, and drill down hand by hand to find out exactly how to split. As you can see, doubling down and splitting pairs are great little weapons in your armory against the dealer, and together they mean the difference between a game with a house edge of less than 1%, and if you do both of them badly, the house edge can be, north of 2.5%. It doesn't sound much, but trust me, it can make a big difference over the long run. These rules are there to help you, so make sure you use them to your full advantage. If you want to learn more about doubling or splitting or any other part of blackjack strategy, head to playojo.com/blog/blackjack. That's it for now. Thanks for listening. Happy doubling and splitting. And as always, play safe.